Nazi Germany spread terror throughout Europe and the world, and to do so, they had to have a massive, massive military. The main military was split into two forces, the Wehrmacht and the Schutzstaffel or SS. The Wehrmacht were the regular armed forces of Nazi Germany, including their air force, navy, and army. Their air force was the Luftwaffe, commanded by Hermann Göring, and he was an ace pilot for them. I think he even fought during World War One, but he injured his leg, uh, and he had to use morphine for that, and he ended up becoming addicted to the morphine. Despite that, he was very close to Hitler. He was in his inner circle, and Hitler trusted him a lot. In September 1939, when Hitler was busy invading Poland, he made Göring his deputy in all of his offices. The Kriegsmarine, the navy, was commanded by Karl Donitz. Not, I don't think for the entire time, but he got promoted eventually. I think there might be two dots above the O in Donitz, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he after the Treaty of Versailles, Germany wasn't able to build submarines. It was part of the restriction on the military, but they secretly did so anyway. And then, to improve relations with Germany, Britain decided to allow them to do so. And then, like within weeks of that, they managed to release multiple submarines, which was kind of weird because they've just gotten permission to build submarines. So, like, how have they made them so fast? But they'd obviously been breaking the rules and making them before that. And Karl Donitz, these submarines were called U-boats. So I'll just write that here because like, that was important. They were U-boats, and they built, I think, like 50 or 60 of them. I'm not really sure, but they didn't build too many of them. I think maybe 50. And Karl Donitz, he was a U-boats ace, and these managed to strike terror throughout the Atlantic Ocean. No ships going from the United Kingdom into the Atlantic was safe. And his goal, he asked Hitler for 300 U-boats because he thought with that he could cut off all the supplies going to the United Kingdom, like food, because they didn't produce all the food; they had to import a lot of it. So he wanted to cut that off, starve the United Kingdom, because at that point that was the only enemy they had. And once the United Kingdom was out of the way, uh, the war would be won. That's what they thought. So he wanted the U-boats, but he wasn't in charge yet. And I'll put an admiral over there because he was an admiral. I think that's the abbreviation, so I'll put that there. He was an admiral, and he asked Hitler for 300 U-boats, but his superior instead wanted to make bigger ships. He thought that they could make warships and win the war like that. So he created the Bismarck, and Hitler decided that instead of U-boats, which was small, he wanted something big to show the might of the Reich. But those ended up being a failure. And it's possible that if the U-boats had been used because of the success that they were having in the sea, in the ocean, they could have maybe turned the tide of the war. But instead, since they had so few allied technology, especially when America came into the war, it managed to stop the U-boats and destroy multiple of them, and eventually they became useless. The Heer was just the regular army, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But the Schutzstaffel, the SS, with a quarter of a million people, it was just Hitler's protection force, but it ended up doing a lot more than that. So this is Heinrich Himmler or Heinrich maybe Himmler. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, and he was in charge of the SS with 250,000 people. The SS was split up into three main branches, and one of them was the Einsatzgruppen. These were the death squads. Uh, I think the literal translation might be operational squads. I'll put that on the screen now. Yeah, so these were the death squads, and they basically just shot enemies of the right, like the Jews. They just shot them in firing squads and then dumped them into mass graves. But this was really barbaric to the high command of the Nazis, like so basically like the people in charge. They found that barbaric, so instead they decided to go and use gas chambers, which obviously was also horrible because if you don't go to the gas chamber, then there are going to be a lot of horrible things done to you in the concentration camps. Like there were a lot of experiments done by the Nazis, brutal experiments which were just terrible, and you can read up about that, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. And the rest of the SS that was broken up into the Algemeine SS or Algemeine SS. I don't know how to say that, and the Waffen SS. The Waffen SS was the combat branch, and the general branch was the Allgemein. And the Waffen SS was broken up into three main parts. The Leibstandarte were Hitler's personal bodyguards, so not the SS, while it was his protection force. These were his actual bodyguards. And the Totenkopfverbande, Totenkopfverbande, yeah, I think I pronounced that not too badly. They were in charge of the concentration camps. So instead of the Jews being killed by at the hands of the death squads of the Einsatzgruppen, they were instead killed by them. So they were both of these did like kind of similar things in killing Jews, and basically just not just Jews, like lots of other people like Russians and Poles and other people as well, like Romani. Um, so that's what the Totenkampfverbände did. But the Wolfgangstruppen were the elite combat troops in the army. So in the September invasion of Poland in 1939, these were the troops that went in and finished Poland off. They worked alongside the Heer, which is the regular army, but they were basically like the Heer but better. Of course, there were fewer of them because the Heer itself had millions, and the entire SS only had 250,000. But they were just elite troops, like special troops basically, and they worked alongside the Heer. The Algomaine Ss, their most important branch was the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, or the RSHA, which was the Reich Security Central Office. They were split into two sections: the Sicherheitspolizei, the SIPO, which was the security police, and the Heidsdienst, the SD, which was the security service. And this man over here, he's uh, Klaus Barbie, and he was in charge of this. And when France was taken over to stop the resistance, they managed to track down one of the leaders of the resistance, Jean Moulin. Just ignore that, Jean Moulin. And he was in charge, so he had lots of names of co-conspirators. And if they got those names, they'd be able to stop the French resistance, basically. So he started interrogating John Moline. They put hot needles inside his nails. They put his hands inside doors, slammed them shut until his knuckles broke, and they routinely beat him up. So by the end of it, he couldn't speak. So they decided, fine, he can't speak. He should have learned his lesson. And then they made him write down the names of his co-conspirators on a piece of paper. I don't think Klaus Barbie was the one who was doing the actual interrogating for that. It might have been someone else. Probably it was someone else. But instead of giving the names, even though he could have and probably and potentially saved himself a lot of trouble, he decided that he'd still rebel, and he drew a mocking caricature of the interrogator. And in the end, he got beaten up. He was half dead, and he didn't want to be killed by the Germans, so he just took a cyanide pill and killed himself. Not Klaus Barbie, unfortunately, but John Monin. And then after that, Klaus Barbie, he did a lot worse things. And in the end, France wanted to arrest him and put him into jail. Like obviously, if they arrest him, they're putting him into jail. But they wanted to give him, I think, the life sentence or death, one of those. But he actually managed to escape with the help of America. And America, basically, the United States took him and sent him to South America somewhere. I think might have been Argentina, might have been something else, somewhere else. And from there, he had to do some operations for the United States. And eventually, when he was 70 and the United States didn't need him anymore, uh, he France caught him. France captured him and then sentenced him to life in prison, and then he died of cancer a few years later. So that was the SD, and like a brief anecdote. If you want to learn more about this, I recommend the book Gestapo. Like, it's obviously he's not in the Gestapo. The Gestapo is that, but the book is called Gestapo by, I think, like Saul Lucas. No, I think it's Lucas Saul. And I'll just give more details about this book in the description, in case you want to read it. It's pretty short and it's got a lot of information about all the stuff that the Gestapo and like just generally the SS and the Nazis did. The rest of the Sicherheits of the RSHA was in the Sicherheitspolizei, the SIPO. And this was split into the Kripo, or the Criminal Police, which was in charge of only criminal matters, and the Gestapo, which was the secret police. The Gestapo did many things, but of course, there's not a lot of space here. But basically, they were the secret police that captured people, and they were like they're very well known. Like they're shown in movies and stuff as the people. So they're definitely a lot more famous than these, because I heard of the Gestapo before I got interested in World War II and history. I didn't hear of any of these other things. I just heard of this. But anyway, so that was the Gestapo and the criminal police as well. Uh, I hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, I couldn't cover too much information in it, and I know I missed a lot of stuff. For example, at the end of the war, so because they were losing, Germany implemented like a sort of draft, I think, with boys from 16 to 65 and men from 16 to 65. and women from 15, no, 17 to 50, they all had to fight in the war. And I'm not sure if all of that actually happened, like if they were actually forced to, but there were a lot of other forces as well that the Nazis made, and of course, this isn't that much detail about any of them. But I hope this is at least a general introduction and just like something interesting for you, um, just to know like the different breakdowns of the military and just generally the bureaucracy that they had. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you learned something from it, please consider liking it and subscribing. If others might be interested in this, please consider sharing it with them as well. I won't take any more of your time. So thank you for watching. Bye.